anyway, we'll be here this summer. This is where we're going to spend August and September.
How receptive are they to you being there?
So that's a great question. Not very.
Yeah. That's the question. Sorry. How receptive are they, for you, for TerraGraphics being there?
So the Ministry of Health is hugely receptive. They're really excited about it. But this is a mining town. So people who've come through here in the past and promoted shutting down this mine have been quickly whisked out of town. The community doesn't want that. They're really excited that this is coming back online because this means jobs in an area that otherwise has no jobs. Men from this community generally leave once they're finished with high school and they go to Russia for work. So the fact that there might be some local employment is really attractive to a lot of folks. If we were to go in there and say, this mine is poisoning people, it's really dangerous, we would also not be able to do our job. So rather than approach it that way, our approach is to say we work with mining communities all over the world. We've done this in Nigeria, we've done this in Bangladesh, and we find ways to reduce the health impacts associated with it. We're not here to shut down mining. We're not here to draw negative press to this Mercury facility. We just want to find ways to support the community and the children to make sure that there's fewer impacts related to it.
When there are other livelihoods in the region, you mentioned this being a rich agricultural area, if mining operations, whether of mercury or lead or some other endeavor, are inconsistent or threatening to that other occupation, is there any, does it give you any sway when you make that argument?
There's an interesting book about that actually called Between the Pick and the Plow, and it's about the shift from agriculture to mining and how they don't coexist very well together. Mining is more lucrative for a lot of folks, and the immediate impacts in terms of sulfur dioxide release that's going to kill off the plants are going to be more localized and not as widespread. So I think the conflict, people still come out on one side of the argument for the most part. We've heard, and I haven't spent enough time in the community talking to people, there are some folks who aren't excited about the mine coming back online. I'm guessing it's probably older generation, but I don't know. I think the younger generation is really behind getting this going. Behind meaning supportive of it, yeah.
Was it kind of dangerous for you people over there working on all this stuff?
So, everybody does this every day in their lives. We have certain things we can do for risk mitigation and exposure reduction. So the same things that we suggest for people in the communities to do to reduce their exposures, we implement as well. In fact, we started at this site in 2016 when Doctors Without Borders wanted to set up clinics to treat non-communicable diseases. And the reason we got involved was we've been working with them in Nigeria and Bangladesh, and they said, we want to put staff here and we don't know if it's safe. So we went in and we did a little bit of sampling at sites where their staff would be living and working. It was very limited. We had to be very careful to only limit it to that because we didn't have the support of the community to do widespread sampling yet. And then recommended mitigation measures for them. So they have to take their shoes off before they go in the house. There's a lot of wet mopping of the inside of the house. They don't eat vegetables that are grown locally. They go outside to get their vegetables, that kind of thing. They also have a biomonitoring program. They test their staff for metals before, during, and after their mission. When we're there, we're like MSF staff, except we're only there for 2 weeks, not a year. And so we've seen no concerning levels in their results yet, so if we follow those same procedures, we feel pretty confident. Same thing in Nigeria. We know ways to avoid eating dirt, and so we use those, and we didn't see any elevated levels in our staff. Yeah. Oh no, you missed a bunch of my slides. That's okay. The other slides really just pointed out the shift from formalized mining to informalized mining. So now in the world today, 20% of our gold comes from artisanal gold mining, and that's growing. 20% of diamonds and 80% of sapphires come from artisanal mining. A lot of our lead comes from recycling, and a good percentage of that is done in small, kind of informal sector recycling shops. So we've seen a shift from the type of facility at Bunker Hill and even Kyrgyzstan, looking at people who are working in a way where they don't have a company to offer them worker protection or environmental safety regulations, that kind of thing. So we have to really shift some of our approaches in working on these projects, because there's no what we call in the environmental consulting industry a PRP, a principally responsible party. That still does exist in some of these contexts, but in a lot of them there's a shift, and so we have to approach these projects a lot differently. It involves working with the workers themselves. It involves governments becoming more active and more accountable and providing resources. There's, I think Ghana was the first government to bring artisanal mining into the formal sector, in that they provided legislation for supporting artisanal mining and trying to make it safer and having fewer environmental impacts of the activity, which is phenomenal. And other countries in Africa are looking at doing the same thing, including Nigeria. Nigeria recently, about a year ago, referred to artisanal gold mining as subsistence mining. So where you have subsistence agriculture, we're now seeing this shift where people are moving towards subsistence resource extraction, which is really interesting. So I have time for more questions because I lost some of my slides. I'm really well prepared apparently. If you want to find out more, we have our website. There you can sign up for our newsletter. We send out a couple a year. Do you have a question, Jeannie? Go ahead.
So can you talk a little bit about how you address political and country crises like you have in Nigeria, in Zamfara, and how you address that, and how you have to change gears and
Yeah.
so that you keep yourself safe and you keep the other people who are working on the project safe.
Yeah, so you're talking about kind of the political engagement that largely Simba does now, right? So in Nigeria specifically, for those of you who know Simba Tarima, he is one of our TIFO folks, but he's on loan to MSF semi-permanently at the moment. And his role there is exactly what Jeannie is describing. What he does is he is the liaison between MSF TIFO, Doctors Without Borders TIFO, and the various levels of Nigerian government. And that's really important because where Doctors Without Borders traditionally doesn't like to work with governments, they really value their autonomy. In these types of projects, we've all learned that you can't work independent of governments. And that's why I mentioned capacity building in the beginning of this presentation. Really what we have to do is coordinate with and support these local, state, and federal governments to implement these projects. In Nigeria, that's become even more apparent because artisanal gold mining is still going on in Nigeria. It's not stopping. Prices of gold are still incredibly high, so that's not going to go away anytime soon. Mining has been banned in residential areas, but there are still people who return to it. There's always going to be a few people who decide that the money is worth it, and they don't necessarily see the importance of limiting it to the mining camps alone. And so really, it's the state and local governments that have to intervene with that and enforce the regulations for banning mining and also for improving occupational safety for these miners. And so the more we can do to support those governments and help them develop and implement their own controls program, the better. And that's been a really important part of project sustainability for us. Yeah.
So in Valley County, Midas Gold is a mining company that's trying to reestablish itself in the area. They have a bad name from years in the past, but they're willing to do reclamation on some of their area. And I wondered if you supported that, or do you feel the mining industry has a place in Idaho as far as, are we doing what we need to do to make the mining safe? Because I know there's a lot of people on both sides of this issue. It would bring in a lot of jobs to the McCall Valley County area. They're putting out a lot of information that says we're safe, we're going to be here for you. So I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah. That's a difficult question because on the one hand, I think without the mining companies at the table, we aren't doing enough. The other side of that, and in addition to that, I should say, on paper, it seems to me that it'd be nicer to have it done in a place where there's regulations and enforcement of those regulations, and they have to act more accountably, so we're not getting the cheap goods and not having to deal with it happening overseas in a place we've never
Do you think Idaho has those regulations?
So the flip side, I'm not a politician, I'm not giving you a political answer. But the flip side is, when we talk about this idea of corporate social responsibility, in theory and in practice, sometimes they're two different things. And so I don't have an answer as to whether or not it's a good idea or bad idea. It's the classic NIMBY syndrome, where you don't want to hear, but you still want a cell phone that has gold in it. So I don't know if I have an answer that maybe that you're looking for, but it's not an easy one.
Just a point, what Midas Gold is trying to do has nothing to do with the operations you're talking about.
Right.
That would be a highly, and there are big pluses to that. If there's ever going to be cleanup in that area, it's going to be done by a company like Midas Gold. It's not going to be done by the U.S. government,
Right.
who actually was responsible for the problem in the first place, but we won't go into that.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's a yes or no answer. I don't see it.
It's a matter of, if you're an environmentalist and you want that area cleaned up, that's the way it's got to be done.
That's the way to do it.
Well, we may have a difference of opinion. But, when, I think there has to be responsibility at the governmental level in the U.S. and other industrialized countries, as smelting and mining and recycling have moved to vulnerable populations in vulnerable countries, because of cost, that has caused some of the horrendous problems in public health and because there have been fewer or no regulations, and there have been, frankly, gutted regulations in this country as well. I think we've got to take responsibility for ensuring that there are functional regulations in those agreements here, and that we're supporting international regulations that support, positive public health outcomes around the world. If we don't, we're going to see more of this, and it's really not a pretty picture. Someone that works in this area as well.
Yeah, I think there's room for everybody. There's a need for everybody to be involved. It has to be government. It has to be industry at the table. It has to be consumers doing a better job of educating themselves and realizing where these things come from. Media play an important role, and the miners themselves in the artisanal framework. So I think that's essentially what you're saying, is that there isn't an international polluter policy, right? We don't have international environmental laws that would regulate this, but if that ever happens, or until that ever happens, there's a lot of other parties that have to be involved. Yeah. I don't know where to.
Nancy, go ahead.